All right, so today we are in chapter 5.2 in our notes. So this is congruent polygons, and I'm not sure why the polygons is written so small, but we're going to roll with it. So congruent polygons have the same shape and size. So when they have the same shape and size, this means that all corresponding parts, for example, the sides and angles, are congruent. So when polygons are congruent, we can write a congruency statement. So if we have triangle ABC and triangle DEF, we know because of the markings on our triangle in the corners here, we know that angle A is congruent to angle D, and angle B is congruent to angle E, and angle C is congruent to angle F. Okay, so we can tell the same type of thing based off of our sides. So these little tick marks on the sides tell us that those sides are congruent as well. So we know that angle or side length AB is congruent to DE, and BC is congruent to EF, and AC is congruent to DF. So a valid congruency statement must match all corresponding angles and sides. So let's see a couple examples. So we want to identify pairs of congruent corresponding parts, and then we want to write a congruency statement. So for my angles, I'm going to start with these two angles right here. The little half circle tells me that those are congruent angles, and so I know that angle L is congruent to angle R. Okay, now I'm looking at the angles with two half circles, and that tells me that angle J is congruent to angle T. Okay, last couple angles, we have angle K is congruent to angle S. Alright, so let's move on to our sides. So let me erase this. And with our sides, I'm going to start with the ones with just one tick mark. And so that tells me that side length JK is congruent to side length TS. Okay, our next one, I'm just going to do the one with the two tick marks, and that tells me that KL is congruent to SR. And then lastly, we have our three tick mark side lengths, so we have JL is congruent to TR. Okay, now that we know that all parts of this triangle is congruent, we can say for our congruency statement that triangle JKL is congruent to triangle TSR. Alright, so let's see a second one. So in this, we can just match up based off of the way they're written in the notation. So for example, angles, we know that angle W is congruent to angle E. Likewise, we know that angle X is congruent to angle F, and then angle Y is congruent to angle G. So I just matched up these angles given their placement in each triangle. Okay, so now let's do the sides. So first, I'm going to say that WX is congruent to EF. So I'm looking here. Okay, and then I know that XY right here is congruent to FG, because they're in the same position. And then lastly, we have our first with our second, or with our last. So WY is congruent to EG. So now I can write my congruency statement. And I already know that those triangles are congruent, so what I want to say in my congruency statement is something about their angles. So I can say that angle W is congruent to angle E, and angle X is congruent to angle F, and angle Y is congruent to angle G. Alright, so now if we are given triangle KPM and AYC, we're given that they're congruent. We want to complete each of the following statements. So really quickly, on these two triangles, I'm just going to write which sides are congruent and which angles are congruent. So angle K and angle A are the same, so those are congruent. So we're going to mark that. And then angle P and angle Y are the congruent. And then our last one is angle M and angle C are congruent. All right, so now we know our angles. Let's do our sides. So KPM and AYC. KP, just the side length, is congruent to AY. And then PM is congruent to YC. And then KM is congruent to AC. All right, so now given that information, I'm going to do the first couple with you, and then I want you to see if you can pause the video and finish the rest on your own. So let's look at this first one. We want to know what KM is congruent to, and since we've already marked it, we can tell that KM is congruent to AC. Okay? B, same thing, we've already marked this, so the length CY is congruent to MP. Or PM, however you want to label it is fine. And then part C, PK, that side length is congruent to YA. Alright. So now what I want you to do is go ahead and pause the video and try the next three on your own. Alright, so hopefully you paused the video and you found that angle Y is congruent to angle P, angle K is congruent to angle A, and angle ACY is congruent to angle KMP. Alright, so now that we know that, then we can make the congruency statement that MPK is congruent to CYA. So the triangle MPK is congruent to triangle CYA, and then if we were to rearrange that a little bit, we can tell that triangle YAC is congruent to triangle PKM. Alright, so let's do one more example here. So if we're given triangle STW is congruent to triangle BFN, then let's go ahead and mark which angles and which sides are congruent. So angle S is congruent to angle B, angle T is congruent to angle F, and angle W is congruent to angle N. Okay, and then ST, side length ST, is congruent to BF, and TW is congruent to FN, and then lastly SW is congruent to BN. Alright, so now given that information that I just told you, go ahead and try and pause the video, and I did give you a little hint there at the end for F, so go ahead and see if you can fill out A through F. Alright, so hopefully you paused the video and you saw that BN is the same as SW, and so you know that it's 9 centimeters. Part B, TW is the same as FN, and so you should get that TW is 14 centimeters, and then BF is the same as ST, so you should get 17 centimeters. Okay, and then measure of angle W is the same as the measure of angle N, and I know I've covered this up a little bit, but hopefully you can still tell that that is an 82 degrees right there. And then measure of angle B is congruent to angle S, so you should get 67 there. And then to get the measure of angle F, hopefully you saw my hint and you got 31 degrees. Alright, I lied, there is one more. we're going to try and find x, y, and z. And so we're given that UVW, the triangle UVW is congruent to the triangle TSR. Okay, so now that we know this, let's go ahead and fill in our corresponding angles, our congruent angles, and our congruent sides. So angle U is congruent to angle T, angle V is congruent to angle S, and then angle W is congruent to angle R. Okay, UV is congruent to TS, and VW is congruent to SR, and then lastly, UW is congruent to TR. Okay, now given this information, I'm going to start setting up equations. So my first one that I'm going to set up is UV is equal to TS. So since I know that UV is equal to TS, I can set it up as 12x minus 7 equals 53. Okay, now when I solve for x, I'm going to add 7 to both sides and get 12x is equal to 60. Divide by 12 on both sides and get x is equal to 5. Okay, now for my next variable that I want to solve for, I'm going to set up that SR is equal to VW. Since I know that, I can set up the equation 5y minus 33 is equal to 57. And if I add 33 to both sides, I get 5y equals 90. Divide by 5 on both sides, and I get y is equal to 18. Now what I want you to do is go ahead and pause the video and solve for the last one on your own. Alright, so hopefully you paused the video and found that your last equation should be VW equals TR. So you should get 3z plus 14 equals 50. Solve for z, and you should get 3z equals 36, so z equals 12.